Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the MIT Alumni and Food and Beverage event, sponsored by the MIT Club of Boston. My name is Kevin McCumber. I'm an MIT alumnus, class of 2005 undergraduate and 2011 PhD. I run food and beverage events for the MIT Club of Boston, and since March, we have opened our events up to MIT alumni and friends of MIT from across the world. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. These events are all part of a series on food and beverage that are really meant to be educational and fun. It's a bit of a tough time for a lot of us right now, so hopefully this provides a way to get a little bit of a break from the day-to-day. So let's talk about the agenda for this evening. I'm going to do a very brief introduction, and then we'll get down to business with our MIT alumni panel. I'll let each of them do a brief self-introduction, and then we'll move into a Q&A portion, which will be in two parts. The first part, some curated questions that are on the top of everybody's minds, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. After that, we'll move to a session that I think has become near and dear to many of our hearts. That's the breakouts, where we'll be randomly assigned into small groups of about 5 to 6 people per room, and have a chance to really connect with each other on a personal level, like we would if we were all together in person on the MIT campus. And then every good event has an after party. This one's no different. So our 3 panelists have graciously agreed to stay after the end of the event, after the breakouts, and we'll be able to come back and folks will be able to unmute themselves, and we can have just a roundtable discussion with the panelists to wrap up any questions that you have, or just to make any comments or inquiries about what you've heard over the course of the evening. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be put on the MIT Club of Boston's YouTube channel. I'll be sending out an email shortly after this event with a link to that video, as well as a few other links that I'll describe shortly. As you know, this event is free to attend. In return, we ask that you consider making a donation to one or more of MIT's COVID-19 response funds in an amount of your choosing. These funds go to help support research and other efforts through MIT to mitigate the effects of the pandemic and try to help find a cure. And I feel like if anyone's going to be successful in addressing the myriad problems coming from the pandemic, it's going to be our alma mater. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, we're doing that through a centralized platform called Meeting Pulse. If you go to meet.ps/MIT Food, you can submit your question there, and you can also view others' questions and upvote those questions. And then during the audience Q&A portion, I'll select just the top voted questions from that list and pose them to the panel. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and appreciate your understanding if we're not able to get to your question during the formal portion of the event. Of course, you're welcome to stay afterwards for the after party, and you're also welcome to reach out to the panelists after the event. We will be providing their email addresses afterwards, so you can get in touch directly. All right, I always like to get to know the audience. So we're going to do a quick poll. I usually create these polls about a month ahead of time, so it is a little bit of a surprise to me too, what questions exactly I put in there. I'm going to launch this right now. We have 3 questions. First one is, where are you located? Second, what's your MIT class year? If you're not an MIT alum, totally fine. The last selection there is that you're not an alum. And then finally, if you had to pick one between food or beverage, what is your primary interest? Don't worry, we won't hold you to it. All right. We have about half of folks voted already. Just give you a few more seconds to get your responses in. Okay. I'm going to close this and share the results, and just do a real-time analysis of the results. So it looks like about 3/4 of attendees tonight are from the Eastern time zone. No international, looks like, which is a little bit rare. We have a couple folks from the 60s class here, and then a good smattering through the rest, including, looks like majority in the 2010s and 2020, and not MIT alums, making up about 1/7 of the event. So you're very welcome to attend. We do enjoy having non-MIT alumni join our events as well. So thank you for coming. Wow. And then on the food versus beverage, about 4/5, almost 80% of folks saying food is their primary interest. I think this is a bit of a food heavy panel, so that's going to be a good tee up for this evening. Okay. Thank you for that. As many of you know, this event is part of a long-standing series of events, and that series is continuing virtually for the foreseeable future. I wanted to give you an idea of where it's headed. Next month, on Friday the 13th, we'll be doing a cheese appreciation seminar. Then we're going to take a break in December, come back during IEP on January 23rd for a smoky Scotch event. That's a Burns Night event, if you're familiar with Burns Night. They'll be featuring Lafroig and Bamore, two smoky peaty whiskeys from Scotland. And actually Lafroig is the Scotch that got me into Scotch, so definitely encourage you to attend that. In February, we'll be doing a wine appreciation seminar with fellow alumnus Dave Stair, class of 1962, who founded a winery in Sonoma called Dry Creek Vineyard. In March, we'll be doing a sake in 101 class, and on April 30th, the day of the Kentucky Derby, a bourbon master class. Much of the input for what events come up are through our post-event survey. That will be coming out in that post-event email as well. I definitely encourage you to enter your thoughts there. And I always ask for suggestions for upcoming events. So you definitely get a say in what's coming up, and I appreciate all of your input. If you'd like to stay in touch about future events, make sure you don't miss anything. I'll send links to a couple of ways in that post-event email. One will be to my curated email list of folks who sign up specifically for food and beverage events. And then we also started an MIT Alumni Fine Spirit Society Facebook group. Has about 140 members right now. We stay in touch between events. I often ping that group as well about things that they might be interested in outside the events. So I encourage you to sign up for that as well. Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce our panel. I won't introduce each individual because they'll be doing that themselves, but I did just want to make one note here that originally we had a third panelist, Shana Harris, who was unfortunately unable to join due to a conflict. So Lisa Farrell has graciously agreed to step in her stead, and I think she is going to have some really interesting insights for us tonight. So excited to welcome you all. Thank you as well to the attendees for joining. Thanks to the MIT Club of Boston for hosting this. And I will turn it over to Air to introduce himself and what his career is. Air.
Let's see. All right. I think I've unmuted myself.
Yes, sir.
And so I have a couple slides we can look at here. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm Air. I hope some of you know me. I've been working on this project, Clover Food Lab, for almost a dozen years now, and I've got a few slides we can talk through. At a glance, so I started Clover in 2008. And if you're wondering what I did at MIT, I was class of 2000, and I studied material science and engineering, and then ended up getting a master's degree the next year in the same. Material science turns out to be a really great major for food. I wasn't what was on mind when I was at MIT, but it's actually pretty great fit. We've got 13 restaurants in Boston, and up until COVID, we were on a very rapid growth trajectory. Now things are all a little askew, and we're pivoting in different ways. The big focus of what we're doing is getting vegetables to meat lovers. So we're really focused on customers who love eating meat and finding ways to get them dreaming about our food, and none of our meals have meat. So when we achieve that, we have a really giant win for the environment. And most Americans eat 3.2 or 3.3 servings of meat per day. So essentially every single meal. And so this is a gigantic opportunity. The tech that we run the business with is built in-house. I don't know if people are interested in that, but feel free to ask questions that we can field later. But there are a lot of things that solutions we built, we really wouldn't be able to run the business the way we do. We would have to have a different business model if we didn't have that tech. Our menu changes daily. That's one of the big things that the tech helps support. And that allows us to buy produce at its peak. So I think if I'm going to try to convince somebody who's wary about vegetables to eat more, they really need to be the best versions of themselves. So that's a really important part of what we're doing. And we, that last thing there is same store sales growth, which is a metric in our industry. So we had been growing very rapidly, but as I said, we can talk a little later, things have really shifted. But this is something that has not shifted. We're really focused on this mission. And right now, 85% of our customers, 85 to 90% of our customers are not vegetarian, which is awesome. We'd like the vegetarians and vegans, but really we're focused on meat eaters. This is a funny picture surviving from when I first had this idea. I'd read some articles about food and the environment, and up to that point, I never thought of those things as being connected. I thought of myself as an environmentalist, but I didn't think about food as part of that equation. And somebody gave me this article, I read it, I started wondering about it, and then came up with this idea. Could you find a way to make a restaurant chain which could help change one at a time, start changing people's eating habits? And I had never worked in the restaurant industry at all. So this is my first job in the restaurant industry, which is at Burger King. And I did that. I got a job at Panera and a job at Burger King. I had a lot of vacation time because I worked too hard, and I took 6 weeks of contiguous vacation and got a job at Panera and at Burger King, and learned a lot, and then gained the confidence to actually quit my job after. This is me buying the first food truck. So some of you may have been introduced to Clover as a food truck company. It wasn't the original idea, but I didn't think this whole thing would work. And so as I was trying to figure out how to test it at low cost, we ended up opening a truck, which is a really fun story. I won't go into it in too much detail there. I am in the very first truck over at MIT. This picture was probably taken in 2008. So this is in the first few weeks of our operations. I loved everything about it. It was completely different than what I had done before. Out of MIT, I worked as in the laboratory with safety glasses and a lab coat, and then here I'm wearing an apron, and sometimes I have to wear hairnet. But it's in between. I went to business school, and I was working at Patagonia and then McKinsey & Company before I did this. So this was a really big shift for me, and I love the direct interaction with people, and I love food. And we just wrote our menu up every day on a whiteboard. This is an early picture from MIT. So we just had this one truck, but it started getting exciting. And fast forward, we have restaurants now. This one's over at Kendall Square. It looks a little different than that right now because it's a construction zone. Some of you may know that. Boston's favorite sandwich. This is really, our business is built on the chickpea fritter sandwich. We do a lot of really fun things with food, but this one's outsold everything else that we've done, and might be what a lot of you know Clover for. And it's really beautiful because it's a great vehicle for us to feature what we're trying to do. And it's like a really satisfying sandwich, but you're eating a ton of very nutritious vegetables. We have a menu, I mentioned before, changed all the time. So those of you who don't know Clover, we have at any given point, you may have 15 items on the menu. It doesn't look that large, but if you look over the course of an entire year, we'll serve 800, 900 different items. So over that time span, over the course of a year, where we have a much bigger menu than Cheesecake Factory, this image right here, that's called a pawpaw. It's a really special fruit. It's like a weird tropical fruit that's native to North America. And we're actually in pawpaw season right now. So anybody's curious about pawpaw, ask a question later, we actually have a few right now. We found a pawpaw farmer in Massachusetts, and we're selling them right now. Brussels sprouts, another one that's coming up really soon. And you can see this one was November 9th. Many of you may know this, but some of you may not. Most produce isn't available all the time, and it's a real stunt to try to make sure an apple is at a grocery store every single week of the year. And a lot of trade-offs that happen. So in this case, I actually got an email in my inbox from Sweetgreen last week saying Brussels sprouts are here. It's not true. I mean, they are coming, but they're not here yet. For the Brussels sprouts, you need to have a little bit of a cold snap. And they were definitely serving Brussels from somewhere else. They will be here, but I think that this idea of mechanical seasonality has been harmful to delicious food and definitely to local food systems. And I think produce in particular is sensitive to that. We're now doing meal boxes. We're doing subscription plans, a lot of different things to stay afloat. We're lucky to have had tremendous success with those things. Right now, I think 40% of our company sales are coming from the meal boxes we ship. And we've turned our commissary into a factory for this. It's really beautiful and a lot of fun. And happy to talk to any more of this later. Hope that wasn't too much of an introduction, Kevin. I'm not sure how to stop it here. There we go. That turn over all right?
Yes, sir. Looks like you figured it out. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Great. And good to have a fellow Course 3 alum in the event. We're few and the proud. Let's turn it over to Jared.
All right. Let me get my slideshow up as well. And then it all disappears on me, so I don't know what I'm seeing, but I hope you all can see what's on my screen there. A quick and dirty run through my background and my history. My name is Jared Sadoyan. I'm the general manager of a restaurant here in Cambridge called Craigie-on-Main. Formerly the general manager and assistant bar director of the Hawthorne, a cocktail bar in the Hotel Commonwealth near Fenway Park, as well as Eastern Standard, its sister restaurant. Now, as a bartender, you're also kind of an impromptu hand model. So I think I've done more work getting the brass rat in more newspapers and publications than I think most of my peers. So, but really the question is, how does a kid of reasonable intelligence, I hope, come from a small town of about 18,000 people called Dinuba in Central California, where there's not really much in the way of tech or really any sort of science happening. A big farm industry down there, and certainly I sort of grew up in a farm town. And how do I get from there, a town that has one bar, and end up in a place like this? This is one of our rooms at the Hawthorne, and looking after what some have called one of the best bar programs in the country, and some have said in the world. So the quick sort of history is, you know, I went to MIT in 2006. It was not something that I was expecting, but a nice surprise nonetheless. And I came intending to major in computer science and mathematics. And it took about a semester to realize that I wasn't very good at math, but the computer part stuck. So I spent many years in the basement of this building here. And as you do when you're in school, you do a little bit of drinking here and there. And my roommate at the time was a collector of vintage posters, and you'll see a couple of them here. And we were very puzzled about these posters. We love them. I mean, how could you not buy a poster with a dancing alligator holding a bottle of liquor? And when browsing a liquor store one day, we found the bottle of Fernet Branca, and we said, my God, we have to buy this thing that's on the poster. So we brought it home. You know, we split the bottle because we didn't have very much in the way of money, and we poured our first shots of this black elixir. And for those of you who have had it, it's not for the faint of heart, especially you know, a young college student. And so we didn't revisit that for quite a long time, but we were very interested in all of these different flavors and all of these different colors and products and histories and stories. And in delving into that, we ended up mixing a few cocktails while we were at it. We threw a few parties at a rapidly growing home bar, which made a lot of our friends and roommates very happy, and certainly us too, because it put us to work. And like Air was saying, the sort of connection you get from talking to someone when making them a drink, making them a plate of food or whatnot, and being able to see that reaction right off the bat, that sort of instant gratification, is something that really stuck with me. Now, I'd read about cocktails, I'd learned about spirits, I thought I knew a thing or two, but the one piece of the puzzle that I was missing was that I'd never actually worked in a restaurant or bar before. So on a lark, I applied to a few places and rightfully did not hear back from anyone, except this restaurant called Eastern Standard, a relatively small place for those of you that know it. And they needed a bar back for baseball season. I didn't know what that meant, but I wanted to give it a try. So I got tossed into the mix and got my butt kicked for about 6 months before I graduated. And after graduating, I did what every good computer science student was supposed to do, and I sold out to high finance to try to make a buck, and enjoyed my time at Barclays Capital as a project manager in the technology department. But I was sitting in one of these, right? Cubicle. The days were long, but it was a little boring, and I needed to scratch the itch that I had started in bars. And so I got a job at a small cocktail bar called Elsa in the East Village. Now, this was my workplace at night, and this was my workplace during the day, right? I would look forward to tending to this small bar with about 10 seats and seating for about 50, or I could sit here. So you can see that the choice eventually made it real clear to me that I was enjoying one piece of my existence at this time and not the other. And so I decided to take the plunge and quit my job and decided to be a full-time bartender. And I found my way back to Boston and back to the restaurant Craigie on Main here near Central Square. I bartended for about 4.5 years here, and eventually was running the beverage program for the restaurant and its sister, the Kirkland Tap and Trotter. I'm a restaurant that really cares about product, right? About where things come from, how they're sourced, how we care for our ingredients, and extract as much flavor as we can to make our guests as happy as possible. And delivering that experience was just a real joy. After that, I found myself back across the river looking after the Hawthorne, a craft cocktail bar with a little bit more of a worldly outlook. We sourced some of the best spirits, liqueurs, and interesting wines and beers from around the world, and served them to a very eclectic crowd that changed every day. And that's one of the most interesting parts about this industry, is that you go through the same motions each day. We make the same drinks. We have the same techniques to produce, the ingredients we use for our food, but the people every day are different. And the stories you hear are different, and the interactions are different, and that gives you, we just derive so much energy from that, and so much pleasure, to be totally honest. Our bar was very lucky to have a lot of people say some really nice things about it. In 2017, our team, we were named the Best American Hotel Bar by Tales of the Cocktail, which in our circle is like, I guess, the Grammys of the bar world. In 2019, our spirits collection, which I was able to grow from about 120-ish bottles to over 600, was on a short list of one of the top 10 spirit selections in the world. So I've been very fortunate. The pandemic has sort of turned all that upside down a bit, and Eastern Standard and the Hawthorne are on a hiatus, and potentially a permanent one. And so I found myself back across the river, back at Craigie on Main as their general manager, and we've spun up a little outdoor dining in a very sort of bohemian setting in a parking lot adjacent to the restaurant, where we've been serving about 40 to 60 people a night in as socially distant and as safe of a manner as we can, as we try to navigate the sort of treacherous waters ahead. Now, my focus then over the years has really been developed into education. I'm myself a lifelong learner, and it is very important to me that those that work alongside me and those that I get to work with share the same mindset. So I've been very lucky to have been afforded the opportunity to teach and mentor and train in a variety of settings. We have a huge cocktail festival in Portland, Oregon every year called Portland Cocktail Week. So I was the science and technology dean. We're with two other nerdy folks like myself. We set up a whole curriculum for young bartenders to learn a few little tricks of the trade. Been able to talk cocktails with a lot of cool people over the years. This was at Thirst Boston, our own Boston area cocktail festival, and taking just a little page out of the finance background. You know, when I was in those cubicles, I was watching millions of dollars flow through spreadsheets every day, and so I became quite adept at navigating that weird world. And so now, with a partner and myself, we teach a spreadsheets basics class essentially to young bar managers who are just entering the fold, many of which come from backgrounds that are not tech or finance related, and so they are entirely new to this. So being able to open their eyes to the power of technology in the workplace and making their lives easier and more productive, and in many ways their bars more profitable. During the pandemic, we've sort of shifted a bit and have done a lot of things online, classes and seminars and whatnot, and it's been a real joy to still be able to connect to folks, and even a couple times with the MIT community as well. So that's me in about 10 minutes. So.
Great, thanks, Jared. Quick little story about my interactions with Jared. I stopped in at the Hawthorne a few years ago just to meet up with Jared to talk about a potential event there. And who was at the bar but Dave Pickerel, dearly departed god in the world of whiskey. And he just happened to be having a drink with Jared. So if you hang around with Jared, I think you get to meet some really cool folks. All right, thank you for that. Lisa, we'll hand it over to you. Is it all good, or do you?
Can you see the slide?
Not yet.
No? All right, hold on. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
No problem. Yes.
All right, now let me just get it a little bit bigger. My PowerPoint is very slow tonight. I don't know why. All right, here we go. It's coming. All right, can everyone see?
As a student at MIT.
Right. Good?
Yes, we've got it.
All right, awesome. So this is the only slide. So it's okay if it's slow from now on. Hi, everyone. My name's Lisa Farrell. I'm the owner of Food Revolution, and it is a incubator, a mission forward shared kitchen space just north of Boston. In event space, but less events now, more shared kitchen. I'm happy to be here. I'm kind of glad I was able to sort of sneak in at the last minute. This is exciting for me. So I've just basically laid out kind of how I got here in a nutshell in one slide, and I can just talk through it. And I feel like, as I thought about kind of putting this together and in the role MIT played and kind of, you know, how I sort of landed in this spot, I ended up creating these 3 different buckets. And it was this sort of beginning, these ideals and passion, right? And then in the middle, kind of like learning the toolbox, right? And then now is kind of getting into the ring on my own and kind of where it goes from there. So that's the flow of it. So starting over on the left-hand side of the slide. So I went to undergrad in UC Santa Barbara, and born and raised in the Boston area. I went to UC Santa Barbara, and there it was really, I was really grateful because I was kind of immersed and I was a bio undergrad, and they had the first environmental studies program in the country started there. So I was minor environmental studies and sciences. And so this idea around how food is at the intersection of health and the environment has been something that just was in the dialogue of how I was learning at a very young age. Like, so when I first went grocery shopping, I went to the Santa Barbara Farmers Market, and it was just all kind of a part of what we were doing. And then at the same time, learning about the environment and the connection. So that was where these sort of ideas and thoughts were all born. But I know, think about business. So I kind of went off and sort of thought about medicine and this and that, and I just wasn't kind of fulfilling it all for me. And it was back in the age of sort of the Ben and Jerry's of the world that were taking off. So if you can see that, I'm realizing now my picture looks small, but this middle picture here is the Fresh Samantha carrot juice. And for those on the East Coast, this was sort of this endearing company that was around about, I want to say 25 years ago, if I'm really going to date myself there. So there was this new company, Fresh Samantha Juice, before there was all these other fresh juices kind of in the grocery store. It was really sort of an East Coast first mover. So I knocked on their door, and they're like, "Oh, do you want to do sampling or marketing?" I'm like, "No, I want to drive the truck." And so the way that they worked is you drove the truck to like you were your own little sales company, right? You opened your accounts, you delivered the coolers, you ran your route and all that. And I loved it. I just really loved this idea about a company kind of making a difference and, you know, figuring out from the ground up on how to make that company work. And I didn't realize I was going to like it so much. And so there's the truck. So Fresh Samantha got bought by Odwalla, which was basically the West Coast sister. And so that was great. So it was kind of instilled in me that I like this thing and I want to learn more about it. So went from the truck basically to MIT Sloan, and really, you know, there learned the numbers, right? So if we think about this middle column, it's acumen and vision. So kind of knew I had this passion, and then knew I needed to build some skills and kind of hone some strengths there. And so went to MIT Sloan, and it was really an amazing and wonderful experience. And really what was instilled there was just kind of how to create this vision and how to think bigger and how to kind of bring all the pieces together. So it took that a little bit similar to Jared. So pre-Barclays, because I was in the same building, I was at Lehman and was there for the transition when they turned the lights from Lehman to Barclays. So it's funny we have a lot of these little connection points, which is funny. So went to Lehman Brothers, went to, you know, Wall Street, learned the numbers, built the models, worked in investment banking for all the private equity folks were our clients. And so it was just a really, really good, easy way for someone who didn't know the numbers to just get a really quick education on how to get confident on the models and how to value things, et cetera. And that was wonderful. So I was there kind of when all that blew up, and I had young children, so it didn't really make sense to stay in that environment anymore. So went off to Pepsi and worked in they had a joint venture with Unilever for the Lipton brand. So worked in the joint venture with those guys and built and ran sales strategy and finance group for them. And that was a wonderful experience because within that joint venture, you had the most of Pepsi is pretty siloed. You've got marketing over here and sales over here and ops. It's all very siloed. But within the joint venture, you've got marketing and finance and sales. And so you really get a sense of how folks build brands and do all this stuff. And so that was a really good experience to kind of bring in the finance experience and then kind of get this bigger picture. So we moved our family back to the Boston area, which was fabulous. And kind of in the course of just sort of thinking about next steps in a job in the Boston area with our family, I'd always been a working mom. As a mom, was always a working mom. And it was really hard to get your kids like a nice, decent lunch. And it was kind of driving me crazy. I'm like, why is this so difficult? So I started this company called Red Apple Lunch in the area a few years ago. And the whole idea was kind of local in your lunchbox. And we're we're going to make it easy for you not to worry about like what your kids are getting for lunch. And learned a lot. And food, food is a very tough industry to be in, but kind of built that over a few years. Ended up focusing on schools and camps, did well, got a lot of brand loyalty, and also just realized the amount of time and effort and energy that went into that. And so in the course of that, took over this shared kitchen space, Food Rev, primarily looking for a space to run Red Apple Lunch out of, but then really just fell in love with the concept and idea of building out this platform and lowering the barrier of entry for folks and kind of shifting the status quo in food around ownership, sourcing, local, plant-based, and utilization, i.e. like wasting less of our food. And so with COVID, some interesting things that have happened is I quickly just hit the pause button on Red Apple Lunch because we don't know what schools and camps are doing and my kids are at home, right? So we have this double whammy. But and what it's allowed me to do is really, really focus on Food Rev. And I can talk more about this later, but what's been interesting is the companies that work out of the food space are so tiny and nimble that throughout this whole disruption that we're all going through right now, like they're little by little just getting stronger and stronger. And they were able to just quickly change their business model. And we have such small overhead. We're not open to the public. So it's just been really interesting to kind of be in that space with so much going on around us in the food industry. And so again, pausing kind of the daily grind of Red Apple Lunch with Food Rev, we're able to kind of really I'm able to think through that the partnerships and platforms of it and reaching out to organizations like E for Empowerment and bringing folks in there. And we do collabs, so it supports all the members on different things. And so it's really been kind of a benefit to be able to focus on that and pause on the Red Apple. And I can talk more about any of those pieces, but I'm really, really enjoying Food Rev and all the potential that it has. So.
Great, thanks, Lisa. I'm glad that the current situation seems to be working out pretty well for you. And
yeah, oddly enough, no, I know I hate to talk too positively for obvious reasons, but it's just food's an interesting space to be in right now, and it's interesting to see what's working and where the struggles are, and so it's been really interesting.
Sure. All right, well, thank you, and thanks again for being willing to join and present and sit on the panel a little bit last minute with us. We really do appreciate that.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I'm glad.
All right, well, now we get the chance to ask a few questions of the panel. We do have some prepared questions. I see a few of them rolling in the Q&A platform, and it's funny because I think that almost all of them are actually questions we had prepared as well. So I think we're going to answer a lot of folks' questions with these. So we'll start with the first question posed to Air, and then others can jump in as you like. How has COVID affected the food and beverage industry? And what are you kind of seeing as the trends or the outcomes from this? What are the possible positives too, as Lisa has touched on a little bit?
Well, there are. It's a disaster for the food and beverage industry. I mean, for restaurants. I don't mean for retailers, but for restaurants and bars, it's just it's a nightmare. I think that some are better positioned than others. Clover, in some ways, I mean, it's a very tough moment for us, but we are oriented to take out. And we do have a lot of technology, and we have a big commissary we can use. So we have a lot of opportunities that others don't. And we have really wonderful investors behind the company. So we're in, even though it's very difficult, we're in a bit of a privileged situation, I think. But others, I mean, fine dining, this is, you couldn't imagine a worse scenario. It's just there's no way to sugarcoat it. And I think that what's really happened in the industry is most were slow to really understand what was happening. And so in April, May, most people I know tried to muscle through things, and were a little bit slow to respond. Certainly in fast casual, most of my competitors stayed open during that period and lost a lot of money. And I think that most of us have applied for PPP loans and are, trying to hang on to the last dollars of those in the bank account. And when those are gone, for many, that's going to be the end. And we're getting close to that day. I don't think the general public has any concept of how dire it is. I mean, it's and it's not that restaurants won't come back. There'll be this death of many, and then there'll be a resurgence and a renaissance. But it'll be a couple years out. You can't just flip a switch and turn on a bunch of new restaurants. So there'll be a period where a lot of what makes Cambridge and Boston special to me, and other surrounding towns. I mean, I'm probably an extreme version of this, but I sort of eat my way through the world, and a lot of my memories are attached to food. A lot of my friends are attached to food, and a lot of the places I really love are just, aren't going to be what they were. And I think that's just a reality. It's sad, but it's definitely what's going to happen. I think that an unfortunate thing happening right now is that this situation really privileges large chains, especially fast casual chains and fast food chains. So a lot of those folks aren't doing that badly at all, and they'll gain a lot of market share, and it will be very hard to take that away from them over time. So that's going to be a semi-permanent shift, I think. And then there's some fun things happening, I think. I know we're being pushed to accelerate some things we thought we would do someday. I think the first experiment for us was when we shut down. I did a little YouTube series we called In Air's Kitchen, and I'm still adding to it, but I was doing it every single day for like 40 episodes with my kids, and we would do like an hour every day and just showing people how to cook really basic food at home. And that was a lot of fun and really wonderful. And then we launched meal boxes that we ship to people's homes, and that business is incredible for us. It's really keeping us alive, and it's also growing really, really nicely right now. So the boxes are amazing. We've tried to make them really generous. People love them, and they're sharing them with friends and recommending them to others. And it's been a really fun thing, and a great way for us to get money to farmers and other providers that we've worked with. And we're also collaborating with others in the Boston area that we really admire and want to support. And so, those collaborators will take a little present and put it in the meal box and have an excuse to talk to all of our customers about somebody we think is wonderful. Clover's got we have a mailing list of 90 or 100,000 people right now. So when we get to say, check out Jason Bond, and what he's doing at Bondier. Bondier is a teeny little operation, but Jason does really special work. And, to be able to bring some attention really can help him out in a very serious way. And we've been able to do that with other local restaurateurs. And we even did we did a little bar thing with Sam from Back Bar, with a little mixer. So maybe we have some things to talk about afterwards. But I think that with all that, there are these really uplifting moments, seeing people come together and do really beautiful things. And, without these sort of trials, we wouldn't have all those experiences too. So we're enjoying those as they come.
Thanks, Eric. Jared, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's definitely a tight-knit community amongst all of us bartenders here in town that all know each other and talk to each other, and been able to see who's struggling with what and how can we help and how can we lend a hand. That's been great. And then the other piece of it too is, we are in a truly dire position on the challenge standpoint, but I also can't think of a better group of people better group of creative-minded problem solvers, folks that are able to that already, I mean, before the pandemic, a night of service was its own puzzle, and you'd have to come up with some pretty wild solutions sometimes to get through it. And so you kind of scale that up, and now you have this big problem that you can break down into smaller pieces and try to attack each one a little bit at a time. And so there's a lot of good things happening, even though a lot of bad things are also happening at the same time. But yeah, I mean, from a place that is by and large fine dining before the pandemic started, you talk about a complete shift of model, moving to takeout. I mean, takeout was something that Craigie on Main probably would have never done, and yet here we are offering it every night. Being able to figure out, how do you cook a 3-course meal and have it packaged up and come home with someone and still be a good representation of what those ingredients were and what those techniques were. It was a completely different style of cooking too. So lots of different changes happening, for sure.
Lisa?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have a different perspective because I'm not running retail ops or in fine dining. But it's been really interesting to see the different, as we move through this pandemic. So we, from a kind of micro, food, shared kitchen space perspective, we never stopped. So when we were kind of heading into our, peak in April, we purposely, the very few companies that were in our space, we paused proactively our ops just to focus on meal donations. So we raised money, and then we prepped meals for frontline workers. We did that over the course of 2 weeks because we ended up raising more than we thought. And our owners did that just to all the money just went to food and staff, so that they could keep their friends that were losing their job, their friends that weren't working, could then be staffed. And so again, it's a very small sample, but it was really, really nice to be able to do that at that moment. And everyone shifted their models, like from pop-ups to curbside pickup and delivery, no one from the public in the space, but all that stuff. But what's been interesting from kind of like an optimism perspective that I've found, from my view of the world, that I found interesting is that normally kind of in the springtime, I would get a lot more people coming into my space and starting up their businesses. They're looking forward to the farmers markets and all that kind of good stuff. And I got nothing, right? So no new companies were starting in the space. The companies that were in the space did well. But then over the last 2 months, I'm getting inquiries all the time. And so I'm now like, I'm done, right? So we're full. And they're tiny little companies, but it's just this, it's this kind of optimism of people like willing to give it a try again. Like I wasn't going to do it 6 months ago, but I'm willing to give it a try again. And so what I'm hopeful for is we've had this disruption, did that, people became more aware of the fragility of our food system and the connection we have to the people that in our community that are making the food, but like, will that stick, right? Like what pieces of that stick and what pieces of that can we build on? And so that's my optimism. And then what I see in my space is an optimism of people willing to take those risks again, which I feel good about. Even though there is this huge, massive disruption, right? And it's going to be really painful in a lot of different ways. Like, are there pieces that we can kind of build together and build off of?
Great, thank you, Lisa. I think I'll pose this first to Jared, kind of playing off that, obviously the pandemic is having a large effect on business. Can you talk about other macro trends as well in the industry, technology being one of them? I don't know, consumer preferences, anything that you all are seeing outside the pandemic that at least was happening up until then, and that you think could continue in the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a very, Craigie on Main exists in a very small niche of this sort of wider industry. So it's tougher to speak on the super macro, but I mean, we've seen even over the start of the pandemic to now, even just a shift in an appetite for venturing out again, where we, early on in the pandemic, when we were initially thinking about opening outdoors, a good chunk of our customer base was, or our guest network was not really looking for that yet. And now, we're selling out most nights of service, even as the weather starts to turn cold. There's definitely, I think one of the questions mentioned, a change in drinking trends, and certainly have encountered that both just personally and working at this bar, where we've seen, as we've ventured into to-go cocktails, there's a greater interest in folks that are looking for things that are lower alcohol, things that are non-alcoholic, maybe something that they can enjoy a few of instead of just one. And I think those are good things. There's a little bit more sort of moderation to it. That's not true for like March and April. I think March and April, everyone was drinking about as much as they possibly could. And I spent a little bit of time at a Total Wine, helping them out very early in the pandemic, and they were essentially doing Christmas numbers plus 30 to 35%. So people were stockpiling, and then I think they realized that, like we can actually take our foot off the gas a bit and take a little break. So there is a lot of work being done in that space, and I feel like the pandemic has accelerated it a little bit. One example that comes to mind is a non-alcoholic spirit of sorts, a company called Seedlip, that has been actively hiring and expanding their market base. They make a distilled non-alcoholic liquid that's has similar flavor profiles to different types of gin, and so they're kind of bringing a little bit of sophistication and sort of elegance to non-alcoholic drinks, which most people are used to those being either too sweet or too sour, or just ginger ale and whatever fruit juice you have or whatnot. So there is a lot of interesting work being done there, and I think the pandemic's accelerating it.
Yeah, I would just say there's a really large trend that's been impacting restaurants, in particular fast casual, so our segment of the industry, which is the move towards multiple channels, sort of omni-channel. If you go back even just 5 or 6 years, a restaurant like ours was taking orders from guests walking in and placing an order. That was one. Or the second was somebody walking in, placing an order that they wanted to take away. And that was it. We had 2 types of customers. And now many in our industry have they have app orders coming in, they have delivery orders. Before the pandemic, they had people sitting down, they had people taking food away. They had like group collection orders, and sort of small level catering orders. So there have been really big changes happening around sort of multiple channels. And I think it's a pretty complicated time. I mean, even before the pandemic, we were facing a really complicated time for restaurants because it's not clear how to navigate those things. And I hope everybody knows how wicked and evil DoorDash and all of the others, Uber Eats, are. I mean, from the perspective of our industry, I mean, they are the devil, and they are just absolutely terrible. And most restaurants didn't realize this when it was a small portion of their sales. So pre-pandemic, people thought, they didn't look at the numbers very carefully, and they're not people from MIT running most restaurants. And they, they thought, giving away 20, 30% of my sales might not be good, but it's only a little bit of my sales total, and how else am I going to do things? And people signed on with them. But now you see restaurants sort of having to reconcile how are they going to run their business if they give 30% of it, 35% of it away. So I think that the development of these different channels, delivery in particular, but also just digital and some of these other things are really having a big impact, and that was happening before COVID. It's going to, play out after COVID as well, but it's one of the large changes I'd see in our segment of the industry.
Thanks, Sarah. Lisa, do you want to add anything to this? Oh, it looks like you're on mute. There she is.
There we go. And I'm sorry, are we specifically talking about tech trends or just in general? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, tech or in general.
Okay.
wherever.
So I agree with both what the other folks are saying so far about this, and I think some of the behavior trends outside of like Channel and DoorDash and that is from what I've seen, which I thought was really interesting, is that so there is this plant-based and nourishing food. I think a couple of the companies in the space that are doing real well, like they make really, it wasn't kind of your typical takeout food. It was really nourishing, like plant-based, like good for you food, right? So that did really well. And the other people that are doing well are like the bakers, right? So it's so it's like plant-based and bakers. And so it's probably kind of similar to the drinks, right, Jared, what you're saying? And so like these smaller, like half dozen cupcakes and this woman that does these amazing wedding cakes, just the smaller celebration cakes, right? And so there's these gorgeous, so splurging on this kind of smaller celebration, and kind of people rewarding themselves, I guess, when times are really tough. Those are just two kind of food trends that I see a lot in the space that I think make a lot of sense. Yeah, so I just wanted to.
I think another thing that's probably worth mentioning is it'll be interesting. I mean, from my perspective, I'm curious to see how serious the economic repercussions are. I mean, we might be going into very serious unemployment numbers. I can't see how we wouldn't. And the hospitality, retail and hospitality is something like 40–50% of jobs in most states. And I just don't Clover, we used to employ 340 people before the pandemic. I'm one of the more successful local companies in coming back, but I'm only employing 100 people right now. I have 230 people I care deeply about and have gotten to know over the years, and I've worked with and cultivated who I can't employ right now, and that's happening throughout. So I think that we look at those indicators; they're always trailing, but I suspect we're going to see the economic situation is going to be much more dire in the coming year and maybe beyond. And I'm curious what that does to food and dining, because we're coming out of this golden age of like 20–30 years of almost nonstop growth, and the impact on food has been sort of making experiences like more and more special and expensive, because to many of the customers of many of the restaurants, the amount they're spending on food, such a teeny portion of their total disposable income. Making something a $15 sandwich, it became fine, right? And making something a little extra special here and there. Locally in Boston, we have Tate as an example of just sort of hyper fancy, right? And that didn't used to exist. It's new, and I think it's a stage of this like golden economic era, and I don't know what will happen to places like that. It'll be interesting to see. They certainly will have a smaller audience, I think, for the near term. And it's not just that, one that I mentioned. There's a lot of businesses. It's just been the general trend. If you take coffee shops, they've gotten fancier and fancier. Fast casual has gotten fancier and fancier. It's just the trend everything's gone through. So it'll be interesting to see how that carries out, and what happens, what sort of changes come as a result of that too.
Jared, you mentioned that you have done some courses for folks in the industry, like on using spreadsheets. I'm assuming some kind of analytics. I was wondering if you could comment at all on the technology question, and especially around that. Are you seeing more use of analytics in the industry, and any other tech trends you're seeing as a computer science person?
There definitely is, and I have a sort of a different view on a lot of that, because I think like I've been equipped with the ability to do a lot of that stuff on my own. That being said, there are, I mean, countless third-party companies, and the DoorDashes and the Grubhubs and whatnot of the world fall into this as well, that are sort of, they want to exist in this middle space, right, between you, the restaurant or bar, and some potential solution, right? So it's either, hey, we want to deliver food for you. Okay, great, right? How much is that valued? We don't really know. I don't think it's 30%, but, or they'll say, what if you never had to take inventory with a pencil and pen, or you could scan your bottles and make that process easier? What if you didn't need to hire a traditional bookkeeper, but we had a service that you could scan your invoices into and a computer will figure it out for you? Lots of those exist, and the development of that is really sort of like, at the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like it sort of slowed down, but then it's really accelerated, and a lot of folks are, I mean, I get some cold call emails essentially a couple times a week now from different people, all trying to carve that little niche out for them. I take some amount of resistance to it, mostly because, we are running, so like at Craigie on Main, for example, we are making enough money to survive, and that does not mean we are like making any money. We are existing, and we will continue to exist so as long as we're able to continue doing what we do, but I don't know how much longer that's going to last. So to have someone come along and say, hey, like let me try to make this thing easier for you, but we're going to take 5%. Now all of a sudden I'm not making any money, right? And for many restaurants, even pre-pandemic, if you were making 5 or 6% profit, you're in okay shape. If you were above 10, great. And then so to have someone come along and say, well, what if we take, we'll take a 15% of your sales, it becomes pretty quickly untenable. So part of what our mission was with the spreadsheets thing in particular was, you had a lot of small bars that were spending $100, $200, $300+ per month on inventory management, for a bar that maybe would have $20,000 to $30,000 in product locked up. And it's just like completely worthless, but it's because the folks, they looked at the spreadsheet and they're frightened. They didn't know what to do, or they would try to tool around with someone else's and they'd break it and it wouldn't do the thing they needed it to do. So we are trying to empower and equip those with some amount of knowledge that gives them a baseline to say, oh yeah, you know what, I can actually do this. But as the technology in our phones and our devices and whatnot become more and more ubiquitous, we're on this march to being able to automate a lot of this stuff. And I think it is useful. It just depends on where it's coming from.
Great, thanks for that. I wanted to switch gears a little bit and ask more MIT targeted questions. Can you talk at all about how the MIT education has played a role in your careers? Jared, since we have you on screen, let's pitch it to you first.
Sure. The way that I've explained it to a couple folks is that I don't remember really much about anything that I actually actively studied in all of my Core 6 classes, right? Like I couldn't sit down and write a working application in Java without some serious Googling. And Lord help me for anything electrical engineering wise, right? But the things you pull out of that really have helped me in the restaurant world have been how to manage your time, how to prioritize the things that you have to do or the things you have to figure out, and then more importantly, how to identify what you can and can't do. I still maintain, and a thing that I heard from an alumni when I was a young undergrad is that they said that MIT will be the hardest thing that you'll ever do, and that everything afterwards is actually relatively straightforward. And it has been challenging in many different ways, but my time at MIT was extraordinarily difficult. And part of that was that you kind of go through that experience, or you lead up to that experience with everything being pretty easy. Your high school or, you know, middle school or whatever, you're successful and you got to do a lot of different things and you're good at all that stuff. And then you end up going to MIT and you're really pushed to your limit. And so for me, trying to figure out, like, I have these 5 things to do, and I know that it is actually an impossible task to do all 5 of them by the end of the week. So what do? You have to punt a couple things. So being able to figure out what's possible has really helped in an industry that is very much seemingly hell-bent on trying to load you more and more and more. So that amount of time management and problem solving and being able to break things down has really, I think, made me better in the roles that I've been able to have over the last 10 years.
Lisa, I'd like to hear from you as a Sloan alumna. You know, the business degree, of course, is applicable to pretty much anything in the world. So maybe it's a little more straightforward to, you know, take a career path from Sloan.
Yeah, definitely. I think like I mentioned in my little intro, I went from kind of driving the truck to sitting in Sloan, and I have to tell you, like, I was surrounded by analysts from Goldman Sachs and, you know, accountants, and I had to learn the difference between a debit and a credit when I got to, like, I had to really learn all that stuff. And so, but then when I started to get to classes like industrial economics, so I learned a ton from Sloan in terms of confidence around the financials and all that, and then was able to go on to Lehman, where that was really solidified. But then I also really started to appreciate what I had learned, right, on that truck and kind of in that business. Because when I was sitting in industrial economics, I was like, oh, I know that, you know, like I've done that. And so it was kind of a back and forth. Like, I grew more confident in what I had learned before. And then I got really, what I didn't know, I got, you know, I was able to complement that and flesh that out. And then I think as I took that with me forward into banking, you just kind of get to lay out an argument, right, and create that deck and slide and presentation. And now as I kind of bring all those pieces with me in a space that I'm so thrilled to be in, the level of confidence I have on a given day, regardless of kind of the types of stakeholders I'm going to interact with or speak to or present to, et cetera, I just feel really comfortable. So if I'm going to write out a grant application for mass development or like whatever, you know, whatever sort of I'm thinking about for the future, what's been given to me is kind of this confidence and problem solving and kind of addressing different stakeholders and, you know, and how to figure out how to get things done either with myself or bringing other people in to help out with that. And that's a huge shift, right? From pre-Sloan to post-Sloan, where you're kind of in your own little space and you kind of know what you know. You suddenly kind of have this bigger vision of what's possible. And then the stuff I really love, just that's directly from Sloan and banking, is being able to, similar to Jared, is you know, helping out and like doing some mentoring. Like, I was literally just sitting down with one of the folks in the kitchen, and I was like, okay, here's a little plug and chug Excel thing for you. Like, here's how you want to think about, you know, just being able to, with a very small amount of work on my end and a really big upside on their end. And then there's all kinds of opportunities like that I really just enjoy doing. So there's the mentoring and then just kind of the visioning of kind of possibilities. So it's great.
Thank you.
You should write the marketing material for Sloan. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Sloan was fabulous, by the way.
Aaron, any thoughts? I know you said the material science.
Yeah, I'll make a pitch for material science as the best best major for food. It's fantastic. You know, before I was in food, I would have thought chemistry or something, but the reality is a lot of chemists are dealing with bulk properties, and that's not where the action is in food. It's all about the surface dynamics and thermodynamics and a lot of the things we do in material science. So it's all those odd things happening on the edges and interfaces. So I think accidentally I ended up studying something that's sort of helpful. Not that I'm, running through, equations and analysis of how our oven's working, but I think that understanding a lot of those fundamental physics, how convection works and, fluid dynamics, it actually matters as we're like playing around with recipes and trying to figure out why something doesn't work. I was just playing around with our pita bread. We make our own bread in-house. We have a special oven from Israel. It took us years to get up and running. And we did it because we thought we could make better pita than we were buying, which worked. And then we also could control what we were putting in. So we started baking the pita with wheat grown in Maine and moving to all organic wheat, which I won't go on a long digression about why organic wheat matters, but there's a lot of really interesting things to learn about wheat. And so the next phase for us is moving to using naturally fermented dough. And we were working just earlier this week with a baker named Richard Bourdon, who's amazing and really responsible for most of the modern bread that's happening in the country right now. And he happens to have a bakery in the Berkshires, and he was working with us because he knows more than anybody about this stuff. And we were talking about why is the dough sticking. And there's a really funny thing. When I first worked with dough, I thought you just add water and the amount of hydration affects the stickiness, but it's not really the case. That's one lever. The other is developing the gluten structure. And he was talking about how bakers touch things really quickly, and it's because it's it's a viscoelastic material, right? And so it actually has a property which benefits from the way bakers flick their hands and touch it. There's a reason for that, right? There's like a physical material reason for that, which is really cool. So being able to share that with him and bring all that together is really special. But I would say even more than the technical things I learned at MIT, I loved being at MIT because I felt like I was surrounded by a lot of really good people. I feel like people at MIT are trying to figure out how to make the world better, and that's not the frame everybody's coming from everywhere else, right? And I think that's something that binds the community together, and I felt that very strongly, and I think supported to think about my role in the world that way. And I certainly wouldn't be doing, the restaurant industry, for all the wonderful things about it, there's 10 horrible things about it. It's a very brutal industry, but I'm working on something I think matters, and that's why I'm doing this. And I think that that's something that a lot of MIT alums can say, and that's a really beautiful thing. So I think that's probably one of the more important things I took from my education.
Awesome, thank you. I'm gonna take the top question from the audience. This is a really good question following in line with what you all just said. How did you bite the bullet and transition from office jobs that probably had very high pay to focusing on your passions in the food and beverage industry? And do you have any advice for making that transition? Air, we'll go to you since you're first on screen here.
Well, like I said, I hadn't worked at a restaurant before, so for me it was like taking vacation, which was low risk, and then going to work for Burger King. That was how I did it. I'm a big believer in trying to, at any given point, and I think certainly if you're going to start a company, there's a lot of ways to go in this industry without starting a company. You don't have to be an entrepreneur, right? But at any point, it's nice to think of like, what are the biggest risks and how can I buy them down at the lowest cost, And so I think that's probably a nice way to think about any change in what you're doing, or if people are interested in this industry. For me, a really cheap way to try it out was going to work for Burger King for a little while. But in general, I listened to Jared's story, and like, that's just a beautiful way to get into this industry. It's like working for others, learning from them. You can go out and stub your toe again and again and again, or you can go, learn from somebody who's already figured out the path, right? And I think that's probably a common thing for a lot of people, is like going and working for others. I'm at a point now where I have a lot of like alums of Clover who come work for us, and it's great. I think early on I was like heartbroken when someone I really loved just came to me and they're like, I'm quitting. And it was just the worst feeling in the world. But I think now I see that as a really positive thing, because I've seen so many of those people go on to do other wonderful things. And I think that's a really great way to get into it. Find somebody who's doing something you like, and go brush up against that for a little while.
Yeah, it was definitely like a shift in mentality that I had when I was at the Hawthorne, of like, these folks that are working here are not going to be here forever. Like, it's not like I don't know, a couple generations ago where you go to work at like the factory, and then like 40 years later you retire from the factory, and like that's it, right? You know, it's definitely, and certainly in the restaurant industry, it's a lot more transient than that. So the question became like, how do you use that time, right? So if I have a bartender with us at the Hawthorne for 3 years, how do I make those 3 years the most impactful 3 years that they're going to have, and how do I set them up for success in whatever the next thing that they're going to do? So we hired and had a lot of luck hiring a lot of folks who had nothing to do with restaurants, instead just looking for smart, inquisitive people who were willing to put in the work, and had a lot of success with them. You know, because you can teach anybody how to make the drink. You're like being a bartender, you're just pouring things from one container into another container, and you do that several thousand times, and you're a bartender. But the taking care of people part, and being able to prioritize, and being able to, you know, understand all the things that you're working with, I mean, that's where the real sort of trick is. So finding folks that are game for that sort of thing is sort of what our mantra became. And then, yeah, in my specific case, I mean, and to echo what Air said, I mean, when I was looking for my first year op in undergrad, the advice given to me was like, don't like look at the ads or look at the whatever listings or whatever. They said, just go, like, you know what professors are doing, what work that you're interested in, so go talk to them. And you never know that they may actually have some room in their budget or whatever to bring you on, or can give you credit or something that they may not have thought to like write the whole job description out. And so we've seen quite a few people come to us that way. You know, so how do you take the plunge? You just got to do it at some point. I was lucky that I was quite young, and I knew that, you know, if it didn't work out, then like a year or two, I can go back to whatever else I was doing. But I've known a lot of other folks who have done that a little bit later in life, and have had quite some success as well.
Can you hear me? Did I unmute? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, I think if you can't stop thinking about food, then you probably want to try to do something in food or bev, right? And so for me, like it's what I think about all the time, right? It's the article that I want to read. It's like I get through the New York Times as fast as I can so I can get to the food section, like buy all the headlines. And so you can dip your toe in the water, right? You can, regardless, I think, of what skill set you have, you can work, you can help somebody out on a weekend baking bread. You can, you know, help somebody's website or app, or there's so many ways that you can kind of help out, either hands-on or with the different skill set that you bring to the industry. But if you can't stop thinking about it, just try it out. I think similar to Jared, when I initially jumped into the food industry and joined the juice company and got on the truck, I was young, I could take chances. And but then I just loved it, right? And that kind of passion and impact that I learned there never left me. And then so I also think for me, the in terms of being a full-time kind of in the grind food entrepreneur is a really huge undertaking, right? So you kind of want to tiptoe around, like if you really want to tiptoe around that. And I think the whole panel can speak to that, right? Because it's very, very difficult. It's hard work, right? It's physically hard work. And then, so I think if you want to fully go into something, I feel like for me, it's always good, me and my family, right? Okay, I'm going to give you a time, we're going to map out a timeline where this makes sense, right? And that's really a helpful way to kind of sort of take that plunge, but kind of maybe draw some guardrails, et cetera. And then I think the other thing for me right now in the space that I'm in is kind of this perfect blend of, I'm in a space and the work's getting done, but I also am kind of like at my desk and behind a computer more often, and that balance is very helpful for me right now versus earlier in life. I could kind of really be hands-on all the time. So it's different phases at different times in your life makes sense too, in terms of how you want to get involved. But if you always are thinking about food and it's really this itch, then just try something, right? Just everybody, like there's a lot of people that want help, and people that are enthusiastic and enjoy doing something are great to have around in the space. So I would just go ahead and try something. Yeah.
Very good. So it sounds like if you got that itch, you just have to scratch it.
You just have to scratch it.
Lisa, I'll pose this to you first.
Yeah.
What can we as consumers and as MIT alumni do right now to help small businesses like yours? Oh, we got you on
Here
mute.
at this. All right, there. I'm failing my unmute situation. So I think, you know, I feel like what you can do, and I'm probably feeling the least pain on this panel right now, and in terms of, because the companies are just so tiny, and we're able to kind of clobber through this. However, what I would say, and what I would kind of remind your friends and family and your small spheres of influence, all that awareness that you originally had during this pandemic, like, do not forget that, right? Like all that disruption that you saw and the worry that you had at the closed doors, like remember that when you get your takeout and when you order your mailbox and when you like things on Facebook, like all those tiny little things that you may suddenly get too busy to think about as much as you did a few months ago, like keep thinking about them and just keep those habits in your daily life, because that's what makes these tiny little companies work. And you hear it all the time, like, so my companies are small, so they, you know, the ups and downs. Oh, we didn't get those 10 orders that we had last week. Oh, she's on vacation. Oh, they're not here. Oh, she usually orders 5 and they only got this. And all those little touch points multiplied, like really, really make a difference. So, so just structure your daily habits around keeping all of the local small food as part of your daily routine, and remind your spheres of influence of the same thing, because that has a huge impact on keeping this whole thing alive in our area.
Jared, we'll toss it to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's the very micro level of like eat at the small restaurants that you love, your little neighborhood joint, or the restaurants that you've enjoyed in the past. I mean, your presence, whether physically out on a patio somewhere, or indoors if you're comfortable with that, or simply taking out, is all helpful, for sure. On the broader level, I mean, though we exist in this like quasi dystopian political state right now, your voice is still able to be heard. Some of my peers have been working on a group called the Independent Restaurant Coalition, that have been working extremely hard to lobby Congress to try to get some real support towards restaurants and bars. And though we feel like we're a million years away from that, and we'll believe it when we see it, I mean, their work got the Restaurants Act, which is a $120 billion fund for small, independently owned restaurants, got that into the last House stimulus bill that passed. So the work is being done, and you know, folks ask us all the time what they can do to help on that front. And call your congresspeople. Every little bit adds up to make some impact, for sure. And if we all kind of sit back and say, you know, oh, it's not, I mean, it's just me, like what impact can I possibly have? That then if everyone thinks that way, then it's really not gonna happen. But so it's two sort of very different angles, both macro and micro. So
Thanks, Jared. Eric, your thoughts?
I think I think some really good advice has been given here. You know, think of opportunity. Think about where you're spending your own dollars, right? Every time you click order on Amazon, you know, you're not helping keep things alive in your local neighborhood. And at some point, they're just not going to come back. Things are going to be gone and not come back. So I think don't use DoorDash, don't use Uber Eats. You know, those things are really a nightmare for restaurants. If you can find another way to get the food, that's great. Leave a big tip. I found myself leaving. I think I try to generally tip well because I'm in the industry, and usually when I'm eating someplace, it's people I'm friendly with. But I found myself giving people much larger tips right now. So if you are, you know, if you have that opportunity and you have the capability, I think that's a simple gesture. And I'd say, I'm guessing most of the people here, you guys love food for some reason or another, and you have an interest in it. So you're probably doing a lot of these things already. I think practically speaking, probably the most impact the people here can have is spreading some of these ideas to friends of theirs, you know, things that you can do to encourage your friends to think this way too. Because probably right now, restaurants like mine and Jared's are being supported by the folks who do understand a lot of this and maybe care most about food. And the customers that, you know, the dollars that are gone are a lot of the people for whom food may not be so front and center. But I think Lisa said it well earlier. Nobody was happy when they tried to go someplace they liked and the door was shut, right? And it just may not feel like an immediate problem all the time, but everything that we can do to work together to help support communities, I think, is really fantastic. If you're following along with what Clover does, we have a whole page on the website of all the different folks we're collaborating with. Maybe there's a way to bring Jared and Lisa in there too, but there are just so many wonderful people who've been making huge sacrifices, personal sacrifices for years to build really fantastic things in the Northeast. I mean, I can say this having been doing this for 12 years now, it's a totally different world than it was. And the food systems that we're building are really fantastic in many ways. Food tastes better. We're getting more dollars to local providers. We're doing more creative things with food. And I think that we can come together as a community and make sure that that's on the other side of this pandemic as well.
Great, thanks. All right, I'm going to go to the top audience question. I think this is probably just for Jared. There seems to be a trend of people drinking less alcohol where they drink low ABV drinks or mocktails. Do you see that impacting the beverage industry? I know you touched on this a little bit already, but just wanted to pose it to you again in case there's anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, and I think like a way that we can add a little dimension to that is someone in the comments was Edward had a really nice observation about the distinction, right? He says the distinction between food and the social context of its delivery, right? A topic that we often had with the staff at the Hawthorne, right, in pertaining to drinks especially, is that you can go to the Hawthorne and you can order an old fashioned, right? It'll be made with Rittenhouse rye whiskey, some bitters, a little bit of sugar, and garnished with an orange peel, right? Stirred with ice, and it'll be $14, okay? You can go down the street to one of our favorite haunts called Cornwall's, which is like an English style pub, and you could get an old fashioned that was made with Rittenhouse rye whiskey, some bitters, and a little bit of sugar, garnished with an orange peel, and it would be $9. And so the question we ask our staff, we say, okay, so why would anyone walk into our bar and order stuff that they can get somewhere else and have it cost so much more, right? And it becomes this illustration of that it's not really the drink that people are buying, right? They're buying an experience, they're buying a feeling, they're buying an ambiance, to tie it back into the low alcohol and non-alcoholic is that the vision, or that the way that it had always been is that those drinks were dumbed down in some way, right? You have a virgin mojito. Okay, so it's just lime juice and sugar with soda water and mint. So I guess instead of $12, let's just make it $7, like whatever, right? Oh, you want like a lemonade? Great. Yeah, we put some hibiscus tea in it, so it's like interesting, but it's still not, we can't charge $12 for that, right? So now we're seeing a lot of cocktail-minded bartenders that are putting the same amount of care and attention that they would with any of their alcoholic drinks with drinks that are low to no alcohol. And there's been books written about it now that have, I mean, a full size recipe book of all non-alcoholic drinks that if you made them and presented them without any context, a lot of folks would mistake them for actually having booze in them because they are so full flavored and so interesting. And yeah, one of them is the book Zero that I just picked up from the aviary, where you can spend a good bit of money and an even greater amount of time putting some of these really interesting drinks together. And the messaging that I see being passed along, and what is important to me as well, is that it's not the amount of alcohol that really should matter, but it's the balance of your ingredients and the flavors that you're introducing and what you're combining and layering together to make something interesting. And alcohol certainly has its place, and that backbone in drinks is one way to do it. But there's lots of other ways to paint that picture too, without just using one type of paint.
Very good analogy. Lisa, I didn't know if you wanted to address that question at all. I know you might be casual consumers, but it's not really your business.
Yeah, it's not really our business. I think it's interesting. I mean, it's maybe something more joint personally. This is a little note, but all food lovers here, you guys might be interested. Check it out. George Howell, who is a legend in the coffee world, has a shop in downtown Crossing, which he would be really happy if you all went to tomorrow, I'm sure. Everybody who's in the business districts is hurting the most, but his I think he's probably selling them now. He started playing around with making non-alcoholic cocktails, but using either the coffee cherry or using coffee in them. And it's very interesting because it's like tasting those, it's shocking to me how much of what we relate to alcohol is like the bitterness, because he has like a sangria, and it is pretty amazing how close it feels, and partly because it's got this intense bitterness that comes in from the coffee component. But I think there's a lot of interesting things to do there.
That's really neat. Lisa, are you seeing anyone in your space experimenting with non-alcoholic drinks at all?
We've got a couple folks starting with shrubs, which are more mixers. So I don't know if their intention is for non-alcoholic or not, but I think just, yeah. So
Okay.
not in my space. Very limited insight into that.
No problem.
I would say for people who at home who want to play around, you can make, a really fun place to start if you want to start making exciting fun drinks that aren't alcoholic is if you have a soda stream, or you can just get bottles of seltzer water and just make your own sodas. And really all you have to do is play around with making syrup, and you can make syrups with all sorts of things. So right now you might be able to get the tail end of Concord grapes, a lot of fun. You might have a tree outside of your house that has crab apples. You can cook those down with some sugar and make a really beautiful syrup, and like put a little bit of bitters and some sparkling water and some crabapple syrup, and you're gonna have a really complex, fun drink. And so I think and sodas are so familiar to everybody. That weird fruit I showed, the pawpaw, when we introduced that at Clover, the primary way we introduced to people is to the soda, and because it's a very unusual flavor, and a lot of people when they taste a new flavor for the first time, it's like they have a little bit of a they make a face, and it's just how we're built. We have to try it a few times, but sometimes getting a flavor that's really unusual and not well understood and then bringing it into a context that is very comfortable and safe feeling works really well. So it's a really fun way to explore flavors and stuff too. So if you're thinking about non-alcoholic drinks at home, before you get into the aviary craziness, you might start out with some very simple syrups and just grab whatever is delicious and fresh and on hand.
Sounds like maybe we need another episode of In Air's Kitchen focused on soda making.
Yeah, sodas, yeah. Yeah.
Another question from the audience that's at the top here. Given the huge amount of R&D in meatless food and milk and in fermentation enzymes, how do you see your industry changing in the next 10 to 20 years?
That was sort of square in the Clover space. It's very interesting. I mean, we've been watching it. We're primarily focused on feeding people that love meat, and so mostly that is. I mean, we haven't taken a path there by trying to do lots of fake meats. I think for somebody who doesn't think there's anything wrong eating bacon, giving them like a worse substitute of bacon is a really bad business idea. So those products have typically really been oriented toward people who've made some lifestyle choice to cut meat out of their lives and their substitutes. In the same way that gluten-free bread is not eaten by many people who don't have some sensitivity to gluten, right? But that is changing a little bit. I mean, I think Impossible has a very unusual product right now, and it's really in some contexts I think it's indistinguishable from beef, and that's a really wild place for us to be. That was really the first one that turned a corner, I think, that we saw. There are some new oat milks that are very interesting as well. Like Oatly's product is very interesting, I think, and creates new opportunities. So I'm curious to see how that continues to evolve. I mean, there are other spaces that are a lot harder. Like I keep tasting vegan cheeses, and I keep throwing away vegan cheeses. Vegan butters are getting more interesting now. There's a lot of progress right there. But I would be shocked if 10 years from now, we don't have pretty reasonable substitutes for most animal products. I think when I say reasonable, I mean like something that simulates what you would get at Dunkin' Donuts, or the lower end of the food chain, like what lower quality cuts of meat. I think we're going to have pretty good substitutes for a lot of that, especially when it doesn't, when it's like mashed up and the texture is a little bit more, not as delicate, right? But yeah, it's what's happening right now. It's a really interesting moment we're in.
Yeah, I agree on plant-based. It's like it's not your mom's black bean burger anymore, right? Like it's I don't see the trend. I don't see people's awareness becoming any less in terms of environment, health, etc. And then I only see the taste getting better and better, and the products that are out there, and the way people are even not like the plant substitute, the beef meat substitutes rather, but the way people are just learning how to cook plant-based is so much better than it was 5-10 years ago. I think in that just becoming more and more mainstream. So I just think this is just gonna stick and get better and more tasty and just offer a wider variety to folks. And I don't think that knowledge is gonna go backwards at all in terms of health and the environment and the opportunities out there. I think it's a really exciting, I think I'm hesitating. Somebody mentioned Littleberg, so Littleberg is a vegetable forward company in our space, and every single thing they make is like one of the best things I've had of that kind, right? And it doesn't matter if I eat meat or if I'm plant-based. It's not because I'm choosing to eat plant-based. It's just completely delicious food. And I think I think the market's just gonna have more and more of that, and people are gonna just become more and more talented on those offerings. And it's really, really exciting because the impact is just enormous in so many ways. So I think it's very exciting.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
Are there any comments on this?
Not exactly my space for sure.
Okay, no worries. Another question came through here. I think this is probably primarily for Aaron and Lisa. How much capital did you secure before launch? I'm not assuming you necessarily want to answer that. Was it enough, and how much should you have gotten to open comfortably? Let either one of you start.
Well, I can start us. So my initial like seed money was about $600,000. But this is 12 years ago, so you know that would be more today. But it definitely was not enough. And even though I didn't even use that to open a restaurant. I mean, I started out with a food truck because I wanted to do it as cheap as I could. But I think that there's a this is going to vary depending on what kind. If you want to start a bar, if you want to start food delivery business, they're all going to have different models. For restaurants or brick and mortar business, it's pretty hard. You can start something. There's an early stage. You can have one restaurant, maybe even up to 3, and you can just sort of make it happen yourself, working really, really hard, and maybe some friends who are also killing themselves, and you can make it work, and you can not spend much money, and you can maybe be profitable. And then there's this chasm in between where once you get a little larger than that, you need a full HR department of some sort. You need like tech support. You need a lot of things that if you don't have them, you're going to be at risk. And so that's, we've been marching in that sort of stage for a while. And I think for people in my industry, that stage goes from 1 or 2 million in revenue, where you're the small company, you could actually make things work, until you get to about 20 million in revenues. It's hard to be profitable at all. So I think this all depends on what it is you're trying to do. If you just love food and you live a modest lifestyle and you want to open a neighborhood pizza joint, you could be open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and get 80% of your revenues in 3 nights and be the best little pizza spot and have a lot of fun doing it. But obviously, if you're trying to build, the next Chipotle or something, it's a totally different path you're on. So I think there's probably lots and lots of different answers to this. I can say when I was starting Clover, I went out and got all the books that every like restaurant entrepreneur had written, the little autobiographies, and almost all of them they're just talking about constantly raising money. Howard Schultz was fundraising nonstop for like 6 years, and by not I mean like every other day he was pitching. He just pitched to doctors and lawyers to like bring in more money. And it was necessary for him. And I think most restaurateurs I know don't feel like they have excess war chest. I mean, I think everybody feels cash starved. So, but you make work what you have, and sometimes that creates interesting outcomes. Sometimes you're creative when you have less.
Great, thanks. Lisa, your thoughts? Still have you on mute.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So yeah, so I'm definitely on the other end of the spectrum in terms of capital. So, I mean, I think about food rev. So Red Apple Lunch was small, so never went and raised money for that. Kind of used a little bit of friends and family self-funding, just to concept test that. And then we never got to a point where we needed to go out and get money. And then I think where I see Food Revolution is it really is an incubator for concept testing. And what kind of my mission is kind of lower that barrier of entry. So if you want to test out a concept, I feel like we make it pretty easy for you it's very low risk, right? To do some, delivery or pickup, right? Of what it is that you want to do, bring it to farmers markets. You can really just kind of get initial feedback, sort of your 6 month, 1 year, get initial feedback on a product, and then decide whether or not you want to go raise money and take that risk and make that bigger. So never had to go through the capital raising for Food Rev or Red Apple Lunch. Haven't had to write my own deck yet. Wrote many decks back in the banking days for the investors. Yeah.
Okay. There were multi-slide decks, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah. Decks.
All right. Great. Couple more questions here, and then we'll get to the breakouts, I think. Interesting question here. Since the business delivers an experience well beyond the food itself, are you exploring any new experiences for COVID and post-COVID that could provide a new business model? Any thoughts about a new value add for a viable and sustainable vision for the industry?
So since I'm already on, we do some small things, and I think you've seen them. So we'll do virtual cooking classes, which people really enjoy right now, family friendly, plant-based, vegan optional cooking classes. We'll kind of give a sneak peek at the space. We've done, with the folks in the space, we've done plant-based collab Thanksgivings, and we'll do that this year, and it's pick up and delivery, so that it helps out all the business. None of the businesses could really probably do that on their own from the space, and so together they can kind of provide that service, and I think folks will be really appreciative of it this year. So going back to, I think Kevin, you just mentioned it, it's just these kind of creative touch points. We're doing stuff around voting, like we're kind of like engaging with people. We're doing raising money for getting out the vote. It's again, so it's like all the different companies within the space, you buy a cake and we'll donate this, right? So everybody's kind of thinking of different ways to donate it. And it just feels like we're engaging with the folks in our virtual and physical community in different ways, but people are really, really appreciative of the efforts. And so those have been really successful, and just nice to be able to do right now so far. So, and they still are, I feel like it's a touch point and people are feeling engaged and supportive, and it's provided a different type of an experience, but an experience where people still feel kind of involved and connected, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. Anything we can do in that regard, for sure. Jared, I haven't heard from you in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of creativity in that space from the restaurant side. I mean, I'll let Eric talk about the meal boxes. They're certainly a one of those different streams. At the Hawthorne, before we fully shut down, I mean, the virtual class offerings was sort of surprising to us, because we had done a lot of in-person classes, and that's obviously a great thing, lots of hands-on, using the same ingredients and whatnot. But then to take that online felt like you were missing a piece of it. But the response that we got was overwhelmingly positive, and same on the cooking class side, I imagine, as well, just being able to interact and talk. And the neat part about it, doing it virtual, is that you're no longer location constrained. So folks across the country were participating in these, and there were company meetings where everyone has been holed up working at home for the last 2 months, and so now all of a sudden everybody can see each other and do something that's not work together. And that was really cool. As we kind of head into the wintertime, and at Craigie now, where we won't be able to serve outside for very much longer, and we're still a little skeeved out with the idea of opening indoors in a small space with low ceilings and terrible HVAC. What can we do to bring some element of the experience that we normally give at Craigie and bring that home? We don't know if it's a meal that is taken together in connection with some kind of a Zoom or video content that helps you understand what's going into the dish, or maybe you were finishing one of the ingredients or something like that. Cocktail classes for sure. We have been toying around with an idea of some kind of like whatever the analog of a CSA would be for paying for a sort of bulk of dinners over a period of time that maybe are linked by a particular theme or particular ingredient or particular technique. So we're still in that pivot mode for sure, but definitely a lot of different things happening.
Thanks, Jared. Eric, yeah, Go ahead.
I'd say for us, some of these things are really little. Like we have big menu screens that are digital and interactive in our restaurants, and they help us share stories, and we just don't have those for people anymore. So we've been playing around with little things like printing a little color stickers and putting them on the bags that people are ordering for takeout with like a little story, like a little teeny photograph and a little teeny story. It's a very small little thing, but it's like a little idea we've been playing with. So I think there are a whole bunch of other small things like that. If you order a meal box from us in the past week or two, we've started calling all of the first-time meal box customers the day they're receiving the box. So I've been making some of those calls myself. It's really fun. So we'll have 90 or 100 new customers each of the drop-off days, and you know, I'll get 10 of them and call those people, and that's been really fun. And they're brief phone calls, but we just say thanks and did everything arrive all right? Did you have any questions or anything? So that's a little different experience than, you know, we would have done, but allows some connection. And I think we'll probably just keep experimenting and figuring out, you know, different ways to connect with people. It's certainly like the thing we're starved for right now is like a lot of our satisfaction. I mean, for me, but also for a lot of my staff, was talking to people and interacting, you know, and now a lot of it's happening digitally. So, you know, we can still do that. The TV cooking shows we were doing were really fun.
Yeah, and if I could add my comments as well, you know, for these events, we had been doing events on campus with 40 to 50 people every month or so, and you know, reaching, I'd say, a limited but very fervent audience, but now being able to expand them worldwide with a couple hundred people on a lot of events has just been amazing. Of course, there's not really a substitute for sharing a drink with someone in person, but I think that there is something to be said about being able to reach so many people and get a diversity of perspectives from across different countries even. So if I can add that one comment from my side, I'll take the liberty. Cool, I know we're getting close to the end of the stated time of the event. We're gonna move to the breakouts now, and then we'll do that for about 15 minutes and then come back for the after party with the panelists where we can unmute ourselves and chat with them. If you do decide to take off before we start the breakouts, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your coming, appreciate the questions. Thanks to the panelists as well, and to MIT Club for continuing to support these events. Hope to see you at a future one. Keep an eye out for post-event email. I'll also include the link to the meal box discount with Clover Food Lab again, in case maybe hearing from Air sparked a little more interest in you and you'd like to get another one of those. Those discounts are good, I believe, till the end of the month. So thank you, everyone. We'll move now to the breakout rooms for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for the after party.